The engine's all assembled, time to put it back in the frame. Get all your tools ready, your mounting bolts. You got your 4 mounting bolts. These 2 go on the bottom. I'm going to install those last. These 2 mount through the front hole right here, and then this hole right here. Obviously the shorter one goes through here. The longer one's going to go through the bottom down here. I'm going to put a light coat of grease on the whole shaft of the bolt, and then I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on the threads on each one before I install the nut on the end. There is 2 washers. I'm going to put one on each side like that, and then on these brackets there's actually 2 washers that'll be on the bottom, and then 1 washer that'll be in between the engine mount and the engine. So just lift it up, set it in there. I'm going to install this one first and then do the front one, tighten those down, and then install these 2 over here last. It's going to be a 14mm socket for both sides. When you go to install it in the frame, make sure everything's moved out of the way. Get your clutch cable out of the way. I'm going to move my carbs, hang them somewhere else. Everything that might get in the way, get it out of the way. So I removed that front mounting bracket for the engine just to make it a little bit easier to move in. 12mm bolts. Slid the engine into place. Now I'm going to pick it up, line it up there, put the bolt through, get that bolt snug but not tight, and then get the other bolts in and then tighten them all down after it's all lined up. After I get the engine in place, the first thing I like to do is put the oil in, that way you don't forget. I just have that bolt in and that bolt in, both of them Loctited and tightened down. I haven't put the 2 mounting brackets on the bottom yet, but I'm going to add the oil, and then I'll put those 2 brackets on the bottom. Make sure the oil that you use is wet clutch safe or contains no friction modifiers. That means the same thing basically, because this does use a wet clutch obviously, so you want to make sure that the oil you use is wet clutch compatible. Now that I've got the oil in the quad, I'm going to install the clutch cable, which mounts underneath this bracket, 10mm bolt to remove it. I'm going to install that and then mount it in that hole right there. There's a little cutout right there. It slides in, and then you bend this pin down to hold it in place. Also, I'm going to hook up the coolant line right here, which goes up and tees off to this part, and then the vent, which is right here, which goes back into that tube right there. I'm also going to clean up the electrical connections for the stator. I have a special electrical cleaner that I use. Spray off this end and the other end, and hook all those back up. I want to keep this wire harness original. I don't know why, because I'm going to keep this thing probably forever. But so I'm going to tape down all these extra connections for the Taurus and the e-brake and the Taurus brain and all that kind of stuff, the emergency brake, all the stuff that I'm never going to use again. So I'm just going to tuck the wires down and then put some electrical tape over them just to clean it up so they aren't dangling down. I also taped up this connection back here for the rear brake light. Now install your airbox. Basically just slide it in through here and then pull it back up onto these 2 tabs right there and right there. And that's the bolt that you're going to use. There's one there and one there. I installed the 2 spark plugs. BR8ES is the ones you want to buy, or and then the gap's going to be 0.7 to 0.8, 20 foot-pounds for the torque spec. I'm going to install those, and now I'm going to put on the coils. Now I'm going to hook up the coolant hoses. I already have this one and this one hooked up. I used a little bit of tire shine to clean up the hoses, and that's the difference. That's the before and the after. So I'm going to clean this one up with the same product. It's actually Armor All Ultra Shine, but tire shine or tire foam will do the same thing. You just got to use a rag and some of the fluid, and then give it a good scrubbing, and it'll come basically back to brand new. So I'm going to get this hooked back up over on the water pump side after I clean it up. You got this coolant line here, and then this coolant line here, and then your 2 that go back to your reservoir back there. I topped off the radiator with coolant. Now that I got all the coolant hoses on, topped off the reservoir with coolant. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the carbs. It's going to be easier to do this with all the plastic and exhaust and all that kind of stuff out of the way, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Really easy to do. Just slide them into the boots. Make sure all your tubes are connected, like that one isn't. I'm also going to adjust them so that that gap's about the same since I don't have the sync tool. Then I'm going to throw on the fuel tank and hook up the fuel source, the 2 fuel tubes to those. I've got the 2 carbs in place. Now I'm going to install the crossover tube for the choke. Now I removed my case saver and then installed the sprocket with the chain. Then put on the lock washer and then put on the nut. The nut torque spec is 50 foot-pounds, and then bend the lock washer over onto the nut so that the nut can't come loose. Then I'm going to reinstall my case saver. Now install the stator cover with the bolts that go around the outside, and then install your shift arm with that 12mm nut right there. Now I installed the exhaust. I put a new O-ring inside the exhaust header right there. I loosened this piece so that this could swivel and then barely put that nut in. That way it was easier to line these up and easier to line that up. So I have the full exhaust installed on the one side. Now I'm going to put the exhaust on the other side. Now I have the fuel tank installed. When you install the fuel tank, it's a good idea to put the front 2 bolts in and leave them really loose. Just get them threaded in 1 or 2 turns, and then line up the rear bolts, put those in and tighten them down, and then tighten down the front ones. I put fresh 40-to-1 mixed premium fuel in. It's always a good idea to wash out your fuel tank and put fresh fuel in if you're going to do a rebuild, in case the fuel was the problem to where you had to do the rebuild. Just oiled my air filter. I'm going to give that a couple minutes to dry, and then I'm going to fire it up.